Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, SHERI HASAN of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on February 23rd, 2024 from karmicevolution.com or any of your favorite podcast stations. Before I get into this week's astro news you can use, my usual quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution, and that a new show drops every Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific and 2 p.m. Eastern on most major podcast platforms. In addition, I want to let everyone know that I'm continuing to offer a discounted 75-minute Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for only $125, and that this discounted rate is for podcast listeners only. So, if you want to learn more about the true meaning of your individual birth chart in order to gain greater consciousness about your soul's true mission and purpose, and what may be holding you back from achieving your highest destiny in this lifetime, I highly recommend this reading. So if you feel stuck, frustrated, or otherwise stymied in your relationships, your career, or other areas of concern such as health, etc., and you want to learn why, then this reading is for you. If you'd like to understand how, by letting your unconscious script, which is based on what I call old soul-conditioned habits and behaviors from the past, run the show, and now want to become more conscious about how to change this script going forward, then this reading is for you. And if you'd like to co-create your own future happiness using astrological insight to do so, then again, this reading is definitely for you. Now, bear in mind, it's important for us astrologers to look at a person's birth chart, because your birth chart is your soul map, and it represents your entire life's journey. Sort of like Mission Impossible, this is your assignment should you choose to accept it. So in that sense, my offered reading is not about what's going to happen, but rather a look back at the past to help you understand how you arrived at where you are today and what changes might be necessary in terms of your beliefs or perspectives in order to find greater happiness in, again, whatever areas of life are most problematic for you now. And it's only when you understand this basic soul map that you can proceed to better understand what path the universe is calling you to follow through things like the transits and progressions, and whether this involves making or simply adjusting to major changes in your life that serve your highest soul purpose. So, as I like to say, conscious awareness has never been so easy or so affordable when you take advantage of my special discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight offer, which you can easily find at karmicevolution.com/karmic125. Now, in addition, I'd like to announce that I am going to be holding a class under the auspices of the Astrological Society of Princeton, where I am currently a board member, called Aspects in Chart Delineation Part 2. Now, last fall I ran Part 1, but this is Part 2, which I'll explain in a minute, and it will run from Sunday, March 10th through April 28th from noon to 2 p.m., and the fee for this class is $225. So, chart delineation first requires a basic knowledge of the meaning of planets, signs, and houses from the astrological point of view. If you understand basic astrology and want to increase your ability to put together the puzzle pieces of aspects in order to gain a greater understanding of the energies of a person's life as a whole, then please join me. I am an archetypal, psychological, and evolutionary astrologer for this course, which, as I said, will begin on March 10th. And this class will review the basic major aspects. So if you did not take part 1, but you have a general familiarity with things like trines and squares and sextiles, the major Ptolemaic aspects, which we are going to be using as examples in example charts throughout this class, as we did in the first class. But my point is, what I'm saying is, if you do have a basic knowledge, don't necessarily have to be deterred by the fact that this is class part 2. I take great pains to make sure that my students in my class understand the practical application of these aspects in terms of relating them to the things we already know about, famous people or individuals in the news, whether they're historical figures who are no longer with us or people whose charts we have an accurate birth time for, currently doing things out in the world. So again, if you know something about the basics of the division of the 360-degree circle aspects, which is sextile at 60 degrees, square at 45, sextile at 30 degrees, square at 45 degrees, trine at, sextile at, all right, never mind. You get the picture. Okay, I did not write this down, and that's why I got confused. So the major divisions, the Ptolemaic divisions of the chart, are about 45 degrees. That's the square between two planets or sensitive chart points like angles in the chart. Then there's the sextile, 60 degrees between planets and sensitive points. Then there's the trine, 120 degrees, and then there's the opposition at 180 degrees. So this class that is starting on March 10th will review these major basic aspects and their formulations, such as grand trines and grand crosses, and add how to delineate some of the more minor aspects in a chart, such as inconjuncts, which are quincunxes, yads, semi-squares, semi-sextiles, and more. So we'll be exploring how to apply the meaning of aspects, as I said, between planets and sensitive chart points, such as angles, and also including the nodes, because I am an evolutionary astrologer, to people's natal charts to deepen your knowledge and understanding of the overall meaning, as I've already said, of an individual's chart. So again, example charts will guide us toward how these aspects actually factor into a person's perspectives and how these define how a person's chart energies actually manifested as a result. And we'll look too at how the general meaning of some of the same aspects may manifest completely differently in different people's lives based on what specific part of the whole archetypal range of options presented by these aspects they've concretely expressed in their lives. So if you're looking to foray further into the art of chart delineation by honing your own skills via aspect analysis, and I always liken this to, the aspects are like puzzle pieces, right? So we can look at them individually, but then with an eye towards how they fit in with other aspects in the chart to give us a whole picture. Don't miss this opportunity to learn with me and expand your astrological knowledge by parlaying your basic astrological learning into a more advanced realm of chart reading. To sign up for this class and to see in written form some of what I have explained to you here on the podcast, please go to aspnj.org. That's ASP for the Astrological Society of Princeton, NJ for New Jersey, .org. And of course, feel free to email me at SHERI@karmicevolution.com if you have any questions, because I would be happy to answer them for you. And I hope to see some of you on March 10th. So now let's get into this week's astro news you can use. We're headed for the Virgo Full Moon, which occurs tomorrow, February 24th, at 5 degrees and 23 minutes, the moon in Virgo and the sun in Pisces, so it's the Virgo-Pisces axis, at 4:30 a.m. Pacific and 7:30 a.m. Eastern times. But before I get to that, let's review what's occurred since the new monthly theme was set at the Aquarius new moon on February 9th. And I want to point out again, as I often do on this podcast, how important it is to look back to better ascertain the specifics of each new lunar cycle, because while so many of us astrologers provide a general description of each monthly lunation's new and full moons, I mean, you'll see that everywhere, right, on social media and newsletters that you've subscribed to, etc., I think it's much rarer for astrologers to see how each of these portions of the cycle of the monthly lunar, the monthly lunar cycle, right, how they've each actually manifested. And because it's looking at these manifestations in hindsight that often allows us to view through the lens of the collective what these actually mean within the wider, society, so that we can then apply these themes to our personal lives, depending on what they might be hitting in our individual charts. So on February 9th, when the Aquarius Sun and Moon came together to form a new moon, they were both squaring their sign's ruler, Uranus in Taurus. And we know, as I've already spoken on past podcasts numerous times, that Uranus in Taurus is about a change in our values, because that's what's been happening since 2018 when Uranus first entered that sign, right? So on February 9th, we kicked off a monthly theme involving sudden potential shocking events that resulted or are currently resulting in a change in who and what we value. Venus, of course, is about relationships. And one of the biggest surprises at that time was the release of Special Prosecutor Robert Hur's report on his investigation into President Joe Biden concerning the classified documents found in his home and office and promptly returned to the government. In that report, however, Hur, who was originally appointed by Trump and kept on by the Biden Attorney General Merrick Garland, took the liberty of analyzing Biden's mental condition, basically calling him an old man with a poor memory. Now, what we know about this is that even though it happened on a domestic level here in the U.S., this kind of news reverberated around the world, and it did so at a time when so many countries are either looking to the U.S. to continue to lead through the soundness of its democratic institutions, while other nations are looking for signs of weakness. And this report, therefore, led to more than simply domestic reaction. So when we combine this with Donald Trump's rally remarks on February 10th, when he told his audience that if NATO members did not pay their fair share, he would tell Russia or any other nation that was antagonistic toward them to go ahead and do whatever they want. Basically inviting invasion, war, aggression, whatever. And we can see how devastating this turned out to be. And this is what I mean by sudden change in perspective in terms of whether or not people, both in the U.S. as we head toward our November presidential election and abroad, can trust the U.S. to be a dominant force and a reliable ally in the world, as it has been since at least the last Saturn-Pluto cycle, not the last one, but 2 cycles ago, when it began in Leo with the formation of NATO circa 1947-48. I've spoke about that in more detail in a past podcast. Now, in addition, as the monthly lunar cycle is waxing and brought us to the February 16th first quarter lunar square of the Taurus moon to the Aquarius sun, we see based on these signs of both luminaries, that they were passing through, they replicated a similar theme, right? So the new moon was the sun and the moon in Aquarius squaring Uranus and Taurus, and now at the first quarter we have the moon in Taurus, which is the dispositor of Uranus currently, square to the Aquarius sun. So we're dealing with the same elemental aspects, and they're fixed, right? And again, Taurus is ruled by Venus, and Aquarius by Uranus, right? So we still see sudden shocks to the system, again, in alignment with the greater monthly lunar theme, which was set on February 9th at the Aquarius new moon. So as we approach tomorrow's Virgo full moon, which I'll discuss in more detail in a few, we've noted the major shocking events that have occurred since both the new moon and the first quarter waxing square. And keep in mind this monthly theme of change in values leading to potential changes concerning older fixed ideological perspectives. So these are the things that have been happening since the first quarter waxing square, some of which were touched on last week, but because the news came out after I had to record the podcast, they were not discussed, or the astrological implications of them were not discussed. So number one, the big news on February 16th was that Trump was fined over $350 million and banned from doing business in New York State for 3 years. Now, astrologers and astrology enthusiasts take note. This happened on the first day, again, of the first quarter monthly lunar square of the Taurus moon, read financial values, to the Aquarius sun, sudden change in those values on February 16th is, again, part of the whole monthly lunar cycle theme. So what I did was I looked at, this is from something I put out that day on Facebook, and I'm assuming many of you did not see it. So I wrote the first quarter lunar square's Taurus moon falls in Donald Trump's 10th house of his reputation at 2725 Taurus, close to Trump's 24 degree, 18-minute Taurus midheaven. Meanwhile, that square's 27 degree, 25-minute Aquarius sun approaches his 29 degree, 55 Aquarius descendant and opposes his Leo ascendant at that same degree, of course. Thus, this lunar square forms a fixed grand cross to Trump's angles, as the moon squares and opposes his Leo ascendant and Scorpio IC, which is the Imam Coli, which is the bottom of the chart and often correlates, but not always, depending on what house system you use, the fourth house cusp, respectively, while the sun opposed his ascendant and conjoined his descendant, as I said. So the ascendant descendant axis represents how people view us or how we appear to them, while the descendant represents others with whom we are in partnership. Hence, how people view and value us, in this case, in terms of what the universe is telling Trump he is worth and what he is not worth, is highlighted for all his partners, past, present, and or future, to see with stark revelatory clarity. In other words, my whole entire point is that where this first quarter lunar square fell in his chart very much affects his reputation out in the world and how people view him and value him, right? So the Taurus moon relates to our emotional values, and in the 10th house in Trump's chart concerns our reputation, particularly through business or work. And the Aquarius sun denotes an unexpected event, potentially caused by another or others, because it's approaching or on the descendant of his house of partnership and opposing the ascendant, which I just went into, or the house of, our personality as it appears to others. Now, bear in mind, too, the ascendant is often called the mask. And so it is how other people view us. Trump has a Leo ascendant, so he comes off as very brazen and very courageous, in terms of not holding back his thoughts and saying what he feels. But underneath, he does not carry the leonine positive traits of being magnanimous, except to his family. And, I mean, Leo is a sign that is very much family oriented, right? It's Leo is associated with pride, but it's interesting that pride has another definition, as in the animal world, where the lion's family is known as his pride, right? So in any case, what I'm trying to say is that our ascendant, depending on the rest of our chart's configurations, may actually mask our true personality, and we may appear to others to be something that we're actually not. So I'll just leave it there with that. So I said that, so there lies the potential with where this first quarter square fell in Trump's chart, that the nature of this unexpected recent event, meaning the announcement on the 16th of his financial judgments, might have been caused by Trump himself, and that the Aquarius Sun descendant conjunction represents how his prior action or actions are now being projected back to him by others. And part and parcel of that ruling relates to the recent February 13th or 14th, depending on your time zone, Mars-Pluto conjunction in Aquarius, which fell within a degree of the cusp of Trump's sixth house of work and daily life, and the fact that Venus will join Pluto, or, has already, I wrote this and I didn't edit it, so Venus joined Pluto there on February 17th. And I'm going to talk about that more too, but in addition, Mercury in Aquarius squared Uranus and Taurus a few hours later on the 16th, which was the date of the announcement of the Judge Engoron's verdict that is costing him, between that and the E. Jean Carroll verdicts, close to $500 million, which, for those of us who are financially oriented, is, $500 million. I've seen it said that Trump, and I can't vouch for the accuracy, that he is in fact actually worth, no matter what he has said throughout the years and says now, about $2 billion. So a $500 million judgment, and yes, there's all this speculation about whether he's going to appeal, and if he has to pay it all. He does have to put up a bond, which carries an interest rate that secures the fact that the money is in basically like escrow until the court appeals play out. So he's in financial doo-doo, but again, the point I'm trying to make is that, and this is very much a Venus-Pluto thing, right, is about a quarter of his entire financial worth, assuming that it's accurate at about $2 billion. So we may assume that this latest ruling is not only a detriment to Trump's finances, but also to his ability to continue to brand himself as a successful businessman in the future and a billionaire, as though he's got, I don't know what he said, but it's like $10 billion or more or something. And again, related to how people perceive him and what his reputation is out in the world, and that this judgment was a shock and a surprise to him. So the big question was, will Trump's reputation as a potential candidate for U.S. president change enough to determine that he will lose the upcoming November 5th election? Now, it may take a while to see if this will manifest or not, but for now, we all get to wait and see whether or not at tomorrow's, either on or directly after the February 24th Virgo Full Moon, which will occur in opposition to the Pisces Sun, Mercury, and Saturn, whether we'll get a definite court date for his criminal trial in Washington, D.C. So we have to wait to see some of these things in the short term, and some of them may be announced later today. we seem to have had, a great deal of news drop like late on Friday afternoons, which is, of course, right after the show airs. So, drives me a little crazy because as you may well know, if you've been listening to this podcast, I am a bit of a news hound. I like up to the minute news, In any case, what we are waiting to find out is whether the Supreme Court will keep Trump on the Colorado presidential GOP ballot, which it does look likely that they will, which will then stop in greater likelihood any other state trying to throw him off the ballot. Whether Fani Willis is allowed to proceed with the Georgia criminal RICO case there, and whether the criminal case brought by the DOJ Special Prosecutor Jack Smith, based on Trump's plot to obstruct justice, which culminated in an insurrection on the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, will receive a start date well before or enough time before the November election to see a verdict. And again, that's because this upcoming Virgo full moon opposing the Pisces Sun, Mercury, and Saturn will likely see the release of additional detailed, indisputable, factual information that bursts the bubble of delusional fantasy in the stories spun by Trump since before he even lost the 2020 presidential election. Now, I will be going again more into that in a few minutes, but what I want to point out again is, two more of the really important events that occurred at this first quarter lunar square a week ago. So the second thing is that also on February 16th, Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny died suddenly in a Russian penal colony at the age of 47. So last week's February 16th first quarter lunar square of the Taurus moon to the Aquarius sun, accompanied later that day by the Mercury in Aquarius square to Uranus in Taurus, which can often coincide with some sort of shocking or surprising announcement, brought us the news that Navalny, Russian President Vladimir Putin's political nemesis, was dead. And this, of course, was 1 week again after the Aquarius new moon squared Uranus, and we had the shocking release of Robert Hur's report, which I've already gone over, right? So this Navalny announcement actually came very early on February 17th, after Venus had entered Aquarius on February 16th, and the same day that Venus exact conjoined Pluto on the 17th. Now at that time, and again, this is a little pet peeve I have with a lot of other astrologers who tend to look at a microcosm of, planets in aspect to each other, but they don't include more than the two planets. And what I'm trying to say is that even though a lot of people focused on the exact conjunction of Venus and Pluto, which was a couple of days after the February 13th and 14th conjunction of Mars with Pluto, is that Venus actually formed a stellium, which was Venus, Pluto, and Mars, because they were all within 3 degrees of each other. So Venus on the 17th was exact conjoined to Pluto, but only about 2.5 degrees away from Mars. So we know that together, these all represent values, Venus, around money and finances, Venus, and the potential for violence, Mars, and Pluto, including death, Pluto. So this stellium, again, looking at these as not separate conjunctions, but rather as connected, is super important. So I want to talk a little bit about Navalny's chart. So Alexei Navalny was born on June 4th, 1976 at 1:30 p.m. in, and forgive me if we have any Russian, native Russian speakers here, because I have really no idea how to pronounce this, but the town in which he was born is Solnekhnogorsk, within the Russian Federation. And I found it interesting that he was born only a month before the July 4th, 1976 bicentennial celebration of the U.S. Declaration of Independence, which of course espouses, freedom and equality for all, right? Since, as I said, Navalny was anti the Putin regime. I'm not going into a lot about his life history because it's so easily Googleable and in the news, since last week, so it's readily available. But rather, I'd like to look at his chart because he had a 28-degree, 19-minute Virgo rising, a ninth house, 13-degree, 55-minute Gemini Sun, conjunct Venus there at 10 degrees, 10 minutes of Gemini, and an 11th house, 0-degree, 5-minute Virgo Moon. Now, this is interesting, too, because he carried a lot of the traits. When I do an elemental modal calculation using a specific kind of formula that I use based on psychological Jungian astrology, I come up with a dominant function of mutable Earth, which is Virgo. And so that means essentially that Navalny was conscious. Dominant function is a term coined by Carl Jung, who was also an astrologer, about meaning dominant function is what we're conscious of, right? So Navalny was conscious of his overall Virgoan mission in this lifetime to be of service, to do so through work that helps others. To do so through work that helps others have a political voice. That's his ninth house, Gemini Sun and Venus. And he also had a mutable T-square of his Gemini Sun and Venus conjunction opposite his third house, Neptune, in Sagittarius, square to his 11th house, Virgo Moon. So he was good at creating Sun, Venus opposite Neptune, a harmonious personal image, or let's say brand, centered around the philosophical concept, ninth house, that having a say in politics, 11th house and ninth house, and who rules the nation, again, Gemini Sun in the ninth house, is the work of the group that is all-inclusive. Virgo Moon in the 11th house of hopes, wishes, and dreams, and of friends and groups, which, put another way, represents, because the moon in mundane astrology represents all of the people, right? So he became someone upon whom others projected through his ability, whether it was conscious or not, to create a brand of being the opposition leader to the ruler of at this point I would just say a cruel regime, right? So according to the Federal Penitentiary Service at the penal colony where Navalny was imprisoned, he, quote, felt unwell after a walk, almost immediately losing consciousness, and died at 2:19 p.m. Moscow time. So at that time, his birth chart, and it's, we have his exact birth time, so shows that Jupiter was transiting through his 8th house of death at 9 degrees 11 minutes of Taurus, and moving into a conjunction with his 8th house 11 degree 2-minute Taurus south node, and a square to his natal 11th house 10 degree 46 minute Mars in Leo. So transiting Jupiter square to Mars can often be a rather sudden, explosive type of energy, while transiting Venus, the ruler of his 8th house, Taurus south node, was at 29 degrees 45 minutes of Capricorn, within a degree of conjoining Pluto, transiting Pluto at 0 degrees 50 minutes of Aquarius on February 17th. And a little less than 3 degrees away from conjoining at 2 degrees and 28 minutes Aquarius exact on February 21st. Also on February 16th, transiting Mercury in Aquarius, again, I mentioned before, squared Uranus and Taurus, precipitating the sudden, shocking announcement of his sudden passing. So it's interesting, I noted too, 2945, remember back before the sun moved into Aquarius, it conjoined with Pluto at 2959 of Capricorn. I'm trying to remember the date of that. If it was the sun moved into Aquarius in late January, So that would have been around the, let me see, hold on, I'll double check. Right, that was January 20th. The Sun conjoined Pluto at 29:59, and then it entered Aquarius later that day, and both the Sun and Pluto entered Aquarius later that day. So I'm going to surmise, though I have absolutely no proof, but it feels like the plot to kill Navalny, because everybody is condemning Putin as being behind his death, and that it qualifies as an assassination, because they've already tried once before when Navalny was in, I think, Europe, I don't know if he was in England, to poison him, that there doesn't seem to be any doubt in the minds of all of the political leaders in the Western world that Putin is responsible for Navalny's death, that therefore the plot to actually do him in might have begun at the Sun-Pluto conjunction at the end of Capricorn. And of course, out with the old, in with the new, right? And what we know is that they're coming up to another election soon in Russia. So eliminating your political rival, who was, even though he was in jail, is not beyond conception, right? And the third major thing I want to mention is that also on February 15th, which was as we were waxing towards the first quarter lunar square on the 16th, we learned that according to the New York Times, and here I'm going to quote, ex-FBI informant is charged with lying over Biden's role in Ukraine business. Now bear in mind too, right, we get that, and I'll read you just a few paragraphs of that, on the day before the Robert Hur special prosecutor's report comes out saying that Biden's an old man. So one is about Biden being involved in his son's, being involved in Ukrainian business as part of, through the connection his son had, because his son, Hunter Biden, was on the board of Burisma, which was, Ukrainian company, but also that this happened. So the Times says the informant's story was part of a series of explosive and unsubstantiated claims by Republicans that the Bidens engaged in potentially criminal activity. The special counsel investigating Hunter Biden, who I think his name is David Weiss or David Weissman, has charged a former FBI informant with fabricating claims that President Biden and his son each sought $5 million bribes from a Ukrainian company, a stinging setback for Republicans who cited the allegations in their push to impeach the president. The longtime informant, Alexander Smirnov, 43, is accused of falsely telling the FBI that Hunter Biden, then a paid board member of the energy giant Burisma, demanded the money to protect the company from an investigation by the country's prosecutor general at the time. The explosive story, which seemed to back up unsubstantiated Republican claims of a, quote, Biden crime family, turns out to be a brazen lie, according to a 37-page indictment unsealed late Thursday in a California federal court brought by the special counsel, here it is, David C. Weiss. Mr. Smirnov's motivation for lying, prosecutors wrote, appears to have been political. During the 2020 campaign, meaning the U.S. presidential campaign, he sent his FBI handler, quote, a series of messages expressing bias against Joseph R. Biden Jr., including texts replete with typos and misspellings, boasting that he had information that would put him in jail. We assume the typos and misspellings are, if we want to be generous and objective, is because perhaps Smirnov's first language is not English. Together, these three major announcements represent a strong potential for evolutionary change, read transformation, sparked by violence that may well serve to change groups of people's perspectives, particularly about topics political. And that's what's happening in the cosmos via events in the collective. And those for whom these astrological aspects hit sensitive chart points may extrapolate down from the collective similar incidents in their personal lives. So This particular lunar cycle, or monthly lunar cycle, provides us with the potential for a change in values about what and who we truly trust. And that comes, again, not to beat a dead horse, but through things that have been reflected back to us in the news, such as Trump's remarks about how if he becomes president again, he would not protect NATO allies. The news of the February 15th arrest of Alexander Smirnov for lying about the Biden bribery scheme, which puts a dent in the whole Republican push to impeach Biden. The February 16th Robert Hur special prosecutor report announcement that, on the other hand, seems to, on one hand, the arrest of Smirnov vindicates Biden and protects him from the congressional GOP members who rule the committees from continuing to pursue impeachment based on this scheme as their primary proof of a reason for it. It dispels that, which is juxtaposed against the Robert Hur report that, denigrates Joe Biden's ability to lead, and the news of Alexei Navalny's sudden death in the Russian penal colony, which, as of this morning, brought an announcement by President Biden of the tightening of sanctions against Russia. So there have been many shocks that are beginning to cause many people, especially those American political independents who will cast their votes in November, to change our political perspectives, one direction or another. And I wanted to mention, too, I neglected to mention, actually, that the first quarter lunar square, which is the point at which Navalny was assassinated, that square fell, the moon in Taurus was in his ninth house, pretty much exact conjoined to his natal Pallas Athena, which is the goddess of justice, which is conjoined to Mercury in Taurus, both of them in Taurus in the ninth house. He stood for communicating what is just in his nation, but it squared the Aquarius Sun in the fifth house. So again, just another. I mean, that doesn't say death or anything like that. But the ninth house is the house of broadcasting and media, and he has Gemini energy in there. Although the house is ruled by Venus's Taurus, and the Sun was moving through the fifth house of risk taking and gambling, among other things, but also, it's creativity, children, and romance. But it's as if the moon, that transiting square hit also his not also, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the chart, so I'm kind of riffing as I go. The ninth house, the news was broadcast to the people, right? Mundane astrology, the moon is the people. The sudden Sun in Aquarius, demise of one of the, I guess this is one of the ways to put it more poetically, one of the children of Russia, the fifth house, who had a very great influence on people, and I'm guessing particularly young people in that country. The other thing, too, is that the Venus on that day, which was approaching on the 16th, its conjunction to Pluto on the 17th was at 29:57, and it direct opposed his natal 10th house Saturn at 29:55. So that whole stellium, essentially, when Venus did meet Pluto and was still fairly conjoined, it means that Mars had already opposed Saturn a few days before. So, the whole series of events played out in judgments, I would say, against Navalny, leading to shocking events because he suddenly died, right? But if we go back, and what I was saying is that, there'll be, this whole month is a continuation of changing in values and perspectives. So I mentioned that Americans, especially independents who may not be committed to one political party or another, or one political party's candidate or another, is not even, mentioning, which I will now, how the worsening situation in Gaza, based on Israel's refusal to stop bombing there after forcing everyone from the north part of Gaza to the southern part, where more than 1 million people are crowded into a small geographic area, and now in the city of Rafah, close to the Egyptian border, has changed many people's perspectives on re-electing Biden, and that's because of his support for Israel. And this is true particularly for Americans of Arab and Muslim descent, such as in places like Michigan, where a majority of that population resides, as well as for young Americans who are currently involved in protests against Israel's campaign in Gaza to track down and eliminate Hamas or members of Hamas. There are protests on university campuses in major cities around the world. And in addition to that, we had yesterday, on February 23rd, the outlawing by an Alabama judge of in vitro fertilization based on declaring that frozen embryos are actual human beings or actual children, right? So again, as the full moon, we approach the full moon, we're probably a little bit, we're less than 24 hours away from that now. And you can, certainly Google more about that. This is a continuation of also the changing of the perspective of American citizens and others outside of America to the Republican Party in the United States. This has been ongoing for a long time. But as we see the debunking of, boundaries, strong boundaries around speaking the truth rather than making up stories. Remember, Pisces is ruled by Neptune, which is known in psychological astrology as the planet of illusion, confusion, and delusion, right? So all of the confusing things, if we trace it back to, say, for example, the claims of election fraud by Donald Trump in 2020, which is completely apocryphal. There is no proof whatsoever, right, that there was any serious fraud in the election process, that this is now becoming more out, the lies told are now becoming more obvious at this Virgo full moon. That also was reflected in the judge's ruling yesterday that the My Pillow guy, Mike Lindell, who challenged anyone who could come up with proof that he was wrong about election fraud, he said that he would pay anyone $5 million who could debunk his theory of election fraud. And there was a guy who proved him wrong, and the judge said that Mike Lindell does in fact owe him the $5 million because the guy took Mike Lindell to court. Again, there are more details around that. But we see also, and this is just a really weird aside because I saw a clip from Fox News yesterday. Trump is put on sale because this is what he does. He merchandises everything, right? These gold sneakers with the U.S. flag on the top part of it. There was a newscaster on Fox News who was claiming that this was Trump's way of wooing black voters, based essentially on the prejudiced kind of notion that black people like to buy sneakers, like that's their thing. So Trump's putting up for sale these $399 sneakers is going to now win him black voters, which is just like, I always say it's like if you hear the sky is falling, and everybody's screaming about that, but then you look up at the sky and it's not falling, you go, oh, and that's what we're seeing at this Virgo full moon. So as we approach the full moon tomorrow, and since the sun has moved into Pisces, which it did on February 18th, where Mercury joined him late last night or early this morning, depending on your time zone, And as Venus in Aquarius approaches a square to Jupiter, which I've already mentioned, that's a kind of like how much is too much, It's a lot of exaggeration, or, the classic advice is don't go shopping, when Venus squares Jupiter, because you might go overboard. However, if you are of sound mind, you could make a good investment, But Venus squares Jupiter a few hours after the Virgo full moon. We're already seeing how this lunation's opposition to, as I said, the Pisces Sun, Mercury, and Saturn is bringing to light the illusions that have caused so many to fall prey to Piscean-type obfuscation of facts and outright lies. So, again, bear in mind that all full moons occur when the moon is exactly opposite the sun in the sky, and therefore reflecting the light of the sun back onto itself. In psychological terms, all oppositions represent a 180-degree difference between planets, which means that they can actually see each other. So full moons reveal, and often with stark clarity, the shadow side of the sun's archetypal energies. And in this case, since the sun is again aligned with Mercury and Saturn and Pisces, as they wax toward their exact conjunctions on February 28th, it presents us with a time when potential just the facts, ma'am, analytical, detail-oriented, factual Virgo Moon type disclosures may well dispel any fantastical notions seriously spun and believed by those in positions of power and authority and those who follow them. So the revealing of such factual information represents the apex of what began at the Aquarius new moon and continued through the first quarter waxing square, and will continue through the Virgo full moon energies until it begins to wane, which is when we're most likely to see, again, its effects more starkly as more and more people realize they've been duped. So, this is, again, these revelations potentially in the form of new pieces of factual information will continue, I believe. And February 28th will be a time when, February 27th, we have Mars squaring Jupiter, which is also a time when something explosive might happen, right? So waxing in strength again during the February 24th Virgo full moon is this how much is too much, right? So we're getting now the announcement by Joe Biden of additional sanctions on Russia, but how much is too much, because a good deal of the sanctions already in place have proven to not stop Russia, for example, from getting money in its coffers through the sale of its oil to places like China and India, which represent a huge part of their marketplace. But we will also have a Sun-Mercury conjunction in Aquarius, and then a Mercury-Saturn and a Sun-Saturn conjunction, all on February 28th. So again, that tends to form a stellium, Sun, Mercury, Saturn, conjunct on February 28th. And the Sun-Mercury conjunction usually occurs around a major announcement of some kind, often by a ruler, because the sun is the king in traditional astrology, and modern astrology is the president or a leader of state or somebody else of great renown. And modern astrology makes, the sun a person of major import. So whether that's on a global, national, or more personal level, such as a father or a boss or other authority figure, possibly even a husband, father, grandfather, could be in your personal life. So I'm guessing that we're going to get still more serious, a more serious announcement of some kind, likely here out of the Biden administration, but also perhaps out of the Trump camp or the Nikki Haley camp, because the South Carolina primaries, the GOP primary is this Saturday, which will be the day of the full moon, which will occur early. So, that Venus square Jupiter on the 24th, the day of the South Carolina primaries, could also be representative of the fact that Nikki Haley got a huge cash infusion from right-wing partners I mentioned that the Koch brothers PAC, that allow her to sustain her campaign, but that bubble might burst after that, which is what most political pundits are assuming will happen, right? So as the Virgo full moon then begins to wane, but again, understand that the sun's in Pisces, right? These energies in Pisces. So again, it's sort of like as the Virgo full moon occurs and then begins to wane, we're going to continue to release anything that has no factual basis in reality, and that in turn may well change people's perspectives about certain issues, especially if you look at it from a political point of view. As if you can't already tell, I am wont to do, as they used to say. So it looks to me also like the power of the group rebelling against any who attempt to stray from it, right? Which is what's going on with the Republican Party. And as Pluto enters Aquarius soon for the long term, ideologies such as these may grow stronger, not weaker. You know, the issue around birth control and IVF and abortion, etc., you know, many in the political sphere who are male seem to forget that women vote and that even modern conservative women, even women who are members of the Republican Party, are not in favor of the increased tightening of their rights around their bodily autonomy, health care, and now to be able to produce children through IVF or in vitro fertilization. So I'm going to leave it there for now because, I will see you again on March 1st. So I want to thank everyone for joining me today. I hope you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me next week, which is March 1st, for another podcast. Until then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to go.